Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable 2025. Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome back to those who have joined us from last year. A big hello to everybody who is new. I know we've had quite a few people who signed up for their first ever roundtable today, so lovely to have you with us. My name's Matt Baird. I've been running the Social Housing Roundtable now for the best part of 4 years. Mainly, really, the last 2 years is where we've really grown this platform, and it's got bigger and bigger. Day to day, I work in recruitment. So I've been recruiting in the social housing space now for 13, 14 years, something like that. Always makes me worried when I really look back at how long it's been. But as you might have seen recently on LinkedIn and things, myself and the team at Spirehouse have been doing a lot of executive recruitment, a lot of senior recruitment. So if there are any positions we can help out with, do know that the money you're spending with us keeps this free for everybody. Because the idea behind this platform is it's available to all. It is a completely open forum where we encourage discussion, where we encourage thought leadership, where we encourage people to really kind of share differing opinions in a space where they're not going to be judged for those. But it means that we can invite everybody from tenants through to chief execs and anyone and everybody across the social housing space to share and really give an even voice. So delighted that we're back for, I don't know whether it's series 4 or whatever you call it, but for 2025, and that's what we're going with this year. To those who aren't new and have been with us for a little while, you will recognise that we always kick off the year with Becky Tucker, who I'm delighted is back with us this year. Becky comes from House of Risk, and it always kickstarts our year with the sector risk report and a highlight really into what the main risks are in social housing as we go into the new year. So without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Becky. For those who are new, Becky will do a presentation and we'll share some thoughts, and then we'll have lots of time for an open forum discussions and questions. If you have any ideas you want to put through, please put them in the chat as we're going through. We're more than happy to have those in there. And then I will bring people in to more share if they wish to in a more personal way once Becky's finished up. So Becky, without further ado, I will pass over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's so amazing that it's 12 months ago that I was here already. We were just saying, weren't we, Matt, prior to this, that the time flies. It absolutely does. And so, yeah, great to be back. It's always a pleasure.
Roundtable since you were last on, and it certainly doesn't feel like it was that many.
How many, Matt?
We did 54 last year, so it doesn't feel like we've done 53 since your last
one. Wowzer. That's quite something. You should have your own seasons on Netflix, I think.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but thanks, Becky.
No problem at all. Right, I'm going to share my screen in the usual way, and then I'll introduce myself properly, if that's all right. So bear with me with the tech for just one moment. Okay, so can you now all see that okay?
Yeah, that's great. We can see your notes, though.
Okay.
Share it in terms of, on the left-hand side, there should be like a presentation mode or something to that effect.
Yeah, let me just stop sharing then and try that again. Okay. It's always the tech, isn't it?
Perfect.
Is that better?
No.
Lovely. Okay, thanks, Matt. Yeah, okay, so welcome everybody. It's amazing to be back. Time really flies, doesn't it, when you're having fun? And we've definitely had fun this side, so I hope that everybody else has had a really fun year as well. And now here we are at the start of a new one. And so for those of you that don't know me, I'll introduce myself first as always. I always say I am not a typical risk consultant, but actually having worked in the housing associations kind of realm, doing the job hands-on for many years, setting up my own business felt like the kind of natural thing to do. So in 2022, my goodness, time does fly. House of Risk was born. And since then, I've been privileged actually to work with a wide range of housing associations, from the micro-sized right through to the truly humongous ones, if that's the right word to use. You know, helping everybody within that to help strengthen their risk management frameworks and really to improve management of risk across the housing sector. So, you know, we're very passionate about that. And that is the kind of our reason for being, if you like, that kind of final point there. So 2024 has been incredibly busy for all of us, and certainly at House of Risk. We've been filled with exciting projects and great partnerships, and we're absolutely excited now to move forward into 2025. So as we head into the spring, then hopefully we'll all feel a little bit better. You'll have to excuse my snuffles today. So I'm looking forward to an engaging session today. And as Matt says, there'll be a chance for you to ask any questions after my presentation. But let's get started now, shall we? So, as I said, it's a pleasure to be here 1 year on, almost to the day, actually, to the last time I did this session for the Social Housing Roundtable. So today we're going to focus on the current risks landscape, which is always punctuated in our year by the Regulator for Social Housing's Social Housing Risk Profile, which was published in October 2024. In fact, on the day that I was at the Governance and Risk Forum in London, which was a very opportune moment. So these risks that we're facing within this document, and certainly in the wider housing sector, include financial pressures, regulatory demands, and operational challenges. But they're not all new to us, are they? You know, none of the things that we read, you or I, in the Social Housing Risk Profile were identifying anything other than the key risks that we've seen for several years now, which is good and bad all at the same time. However, today I'd like us to kind of look at that in a slightly different approach. So we're going to go over those risks in the normal way that we are always doing, but then I want us to kind of reframe our role within that and actually have a look at how we support our organizations in managing these persistent risks, because actually the risks themselves haven't changed that much. It's our approach, I think, that needs to have a really forward-looking mindset, one that emphasizes the opportunity, that strategic alignment, and resilience within that. Risk management should absolutely be a positive approach rather than a barrier to progress, but actually more of a tool that enables that. So before we move into the main slides, I want to highlight the key takeaways for you today. So our goal here is to ensure that by the end of this, you'll leave with some new ideas, actually some new strategies, and some renewed sense of how risk management can drive real value in the organization. I've broken this down into 3 areas that you can see here. So first, innovative thinking. So we'll be focusing on new approaches to managing risk in a way that moves beyond traditional reactive model. Because too often risk management can feel like an exercise in box ticking, can't it? Whereas actually ensuring to meet regulatory requirements without necessarily adding any strategic value isn't what we're looking for. So today we're going to explore how we can apply a proactive mindset to tackling those persistent risks that we're seeing, creating opportunities that also enhance organizational resilience and support long-term goals within your organizations. And then next we'll dive into the kind of practical solutions. So there isn't just about the theory then, this is about the real world. How can we action strategies that you can take back to your organization and start applying immediately? We'll cover these in areas such as enhancing the risk appetite framework, implementing advanced stress testing, and actually getting involved in that process as well, and the scenario planning. And ultimately, how you can better support your boards and leadership in making informed strategic decisions. And then lastly, we'll discuss that leadership in risk management approach. This is about how you, as key professionals, can position yourselves as key contributors within your organization. So risk management, as we all know, isn't just about identifying risk. It's about influencing then those risks and how they're managed, mitigated, and turned into opportunities where it's appropriate to do so. By leading this charge on proactive risk management, you can help your organization then navigate the uncertainty, build that resilience, drive sustainable growth in increasingly complex environment. So in summary here then, today we're about equipping you with new ways of thinking, practical strategies, and leadership mindset. Let's keep these takeaways in mind then. I'm going to start with an overview of the sector's current risk landscape as advertised. So while the risks themselves may seem familiar, as we've said, the environment in which we're managing continues to evolve. So making it essential for us as risk professionals to stay ahead of the curve. On this slide, I've grouped the risks together into kind of two main categories: strategic financial risks and regulatory and governance risks. These categories encompass some of the most pressing challenges faced by housing associations today. So let's begin then with that strategic financial risk, which remain at the forefront of concerns absolutely for the housing sector, where we've got, constrained financial viability with rising borrowing costs and reduced margins. Many housing associations are finding it increasingly difficult to maintain financial headroom. The pressure on funding models, this includes not only rising costs, but also a challenge of securing long-term sustainable funding in an uncertain economic climate, not just for the housing sector, but more broadly, which adds an element of pressure too. And then that debt servicing piece. For the first time in over a decade, the sector is seeing debt servicing costs outstrip net earnings, highlighting the need for enhanced financial resilience and certainly better stress testing too. So these risks directly impact how housing associations plan for the future, whether it's investing in homes that are new to provide that kind of new supply, or maintaining our existing stock, or balancing resident affordability with financial sustainability. And then we move on to the regulatory and governance risks. So the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023 introduced enhanced oversight, requiring housing associations to demonstrate greater accountability and compliance. There are greater expectations, therefore, around governance and transparency, particularly when it comes to resident engagement. Boards are not only managing financial and operational risks, but also ensuring now that they need to be genuinely listening to and acting on resident feedback. So that's not just listening, that's actually acting upon resident feedback, being proactive within that. So that kind of compliance risk area then is also evolving, especially in terms of safety, quality, decency standards. We must be continuously adapting to meet these needs, requirements without increasing the operational burden on our organisations. So these strategic, financial, regulatory and governance risks are significant, but they are, of course, only part of the picture. So continuing from the previous slide, we've seen how that strategic, financial, regulatory risk are shaping the operating environment for housing associations. Now let's look at the critical categories, including operational, reputational, service delivery risks, for example. These risks are not only affect our day-to-day operations, but can also have a long-term impact on our organisation's reputation, as well as the sector's reputation and stakeholder confidence within that too. So here we've got operational risks, which have grown significantly in prominence, in my view. So we're starting to think about operational risks as the potential to impact on our strategy, as well as our strategic risks or principal risks, whichever language you use. And particularly since, high-profile events like Grenfell, absolutely, they remain a top priority. Heightened focus on fire safety, damp and mold, and compliance more generally. So associations are absolutely under greater scrutiny, which is right in that context, to ensure that residents live in safe, healthy environments. We're not going to argue with that at all. A failure to address these risks are resulting in regulatory penalties, certainly downgrades that we're seeing quite frequently in the sector at the moment, and of course, reputational damage for both them and the sector more broadly. So many housing associations manage aging properties. That is consistent across most of our associations in the UK. And actually, with that constrained financial resources that we talk about, maintaining stock at acceptable standards presents further substantial challenges. There's increasing pressure to meet energy efficiency and decency standards, which require costly retrofitting and upgrades, and often without actually understanding the true costs of these to either us or our residents. So achieving these targets while balancing financial constraints is a critical operational risk that absolutely needs innovative solutions. Working closely to manage these risks with our asset management teams to develop definitely long-term sustainable solutions, ensure compliance with safety and energy standards while maintaining that kind of financial viability too. So now let's talk about the reputation and service delivery risks. And as always, I'll caveat that with, I'm not expecting you to have reputation on your strategic or principal risk registers. This is a consequence of many risks failing. But in the broader context, let's call it reputation risk, there is a direct risk to resident satisfaction, organisational and sector reputation. So associations not only need to meet decent homes, but also deliver excellent services and engage meaningfully with their residents at the same time. Media, regulator, and stakeholders are paying closer attention to the sector. We see that as an ongoing trend and nothing new here. Any perceived failures, whether in governance, safety, or service delivery, can lead to significant reputational damage, and we've seen that over the recent years too. This risk is amplified, of course, by the interconnected nature of governance, compliance, and service delivery that we've talked about here. Even a minor failure in one of these areas can quickly escalate into a broader reputational crisis. And crisis management is something that I absolutely encourage you to go take a look at in your organizations, to be prepared for when or if crisis happens to you in your organizations. It isn't just about business continuity, it's about something different to that, crisis management. And then reputation risks require, of course, that proactive continuum management, which is, the instant management as well around social media, making sure that we're including effective resident engagement, transparent communications, and robust governance frameworks too. So in summary here, with those high-level risks, the strategic, financial, regulatory, operational, and reputational form this complex landscape that we require to have that more proactive and integrated approach that I've talked about. So in the next section, we're going to talk about the innovative strategies and solutions that we can adopt to help our organisations not only manage these risks, but also create long-term value as well. So let's move on to explore how we can, apply these forward-looking risk management techniques in practice. So now that we've reviewed the risks that are shaping the sector, let's now look at why a new approach, why I'm talking about, a different approach perhaps to risk management is essential at this particular time. So housing associations are facing a set of persistent challenges that aren't going away. We're seeing that year on year on year, and that's evolving. And the expectations from our boards, the regulator, and stakeholders are evolving too. So these expectations mean that as professionals within our organisations, we need to take a more proactive, forward-looking approach. So I've grouped the main challenges here into these three key areas that you see. So the economic pressures, regulatory demands, and data and cyber risks. I've deliberately put cyber risk in there as well, but more broadly, that data piece. So the first category we've got here is that economic pressures, which remain a dominant issue. So rising inflation and borrowing costs is squeezing operational budgets. We're seeing that day in, day out, making it harder to balance maintaining stock, meeting safety standards, and delivering basic resident services. And then that limited financial headroom with higher interest rates and rising costs for housing associations, we've less capacity for new investments and developments, which in itself is going to inhibit that new development piece that we so desperately need within the sector. And then that increased reliance on robust financial stress testing. Given the economic uncertainty, there is a great growing need for rigorous multivariate stress testing to ensure financial resilience within your organisations. The bit that I think we do in the sector most consistently that I see is that risk management happens somewhere over there and stress testing and scenario planning somewhere over here. And actually, those two teams getting more involved with each other absolutely needs to provide a bit of a golden thread between what your risk register is saying versus what your stress testing is saying. And stress testing things that go beyond the financial is really key to that process. The regulatory demands are growing. So we absolutely see, enhanced oversight and evolving standards, such as those that were called out in the social housing regulation in 2023, without significantly increasing our operational costs. So we've got to do more with less, which is, a common and recognisable theme to us, I'm sure. These new requirements around resident engagement as well are new, I say with a caveat. For those that have been in the housing sector for a long time, will know that we're kind of circling back around a bit now when it comes to what the expectations are for resident engagement and actually meaningfully listening to our residents in a way that adds value and changes things, truly changes things. And then maintaining that governance excellence amid that growing scrutiny is also critical, with boards expected to demonstrate greater accountabilities as a result of that. So as we start to see the new wave of regime from our regulator in their inspections, we start to see a greater burden on our boards to be able to demonstrate how they are doing that. And then finally on this slide, we're talking about that kind of data and cyber, and that cyber threats are a growing concern. Protecting sensitive resident data and financial data is absolutely critical to each of us. Housing associations must meet data protection requirements such as GDPR as a minimum without maintaining operational efficiency. But there's also a need to use data more effectively to identify emerging risks and inform our decision-making more comprehensively. So we can take the lead in embedding data-driven approaches into our organisation's risk management framework, ensuring that data isn't just seen as a compliance issue, but also as a tool for better decision-making. These challenges underscore why traditional reactive risk management is no longer enough. Those of you that are directly supporting your organizations with risk management need to get in there. You need to roll your sleeves up and get into the areas of the organization that broadly need you to be there to provide that critical eye, that professional risk view of the decisions that are being made to help us keep pace with the evolving expectations. We must, adopt a more proactive, integrated approach that enhances resilience, that creates value for your organizations. And so next we'll explore some of those solutions that can help us with these challenges more head on, if you like. So we've outlined the key challenges, and let's shift now to our focus to that kind of multivariate solutions of our own. Tackling persistent and evolving risks isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. We absolutely need to be applying a layered, flexible strategies across the different areas of your organization and across the different areas of risk to build that resilience and adaptability in the complex landscape. So on this slide, we've explored 3 key areas of solutions with emphasis on how we can combine and test together those multivariate stress testings. So these solutions, when applied dynamically and interactively, help housing associations respond faster, improve foresight, and ensure long-term sustainability. The first one we're looking at is financial viability, where different funding, planning, and testing approaches can be layered to improve financial resilience. So diversifying funding models, instead of relying on our traditional loans, associations can combine funding sources like green bonds and ethical investment funds and joint ventures. I'm seeing this more and more as I go around the sector. And these provide both financial flexibility and reputational benefits, particularly when aligned with ESG goals as well. And multivariate testing examples I see might simulate different funding scenarios alongside varying inflation rates and interest rates, increasing to assess which models offer the best resilience for that organization. And then dynamic stress testing, and I mentioned this earlier. As risk professionals that are listening, it's really important to have these conversations with your finance colleagues who are likely already carrying out these stress testing, whether you are involved or not. So don't just provide the risk register when asked. Provide some questions and get involved in that process as well. Start to embed within that stress testing approach to make sure that it is joined up with the risks across the organization, not just those financial risks, because you run the risk otherwise of finance teams picking off the risks in the risk register that only relate to finances, the obvious things, when actually there are more nuanced risks that can happen, as a multivariate approach. Because risks don't happen in isolation, we know that for sure. And then the second area that we've got here is the regulatory governance area. So that multivariate approach can absolutely help your associations balance compliance with efficiency by integrating governance improvements into the everyday operations of the organization. So integrated assurance frameworks are a great way of doing this, aligning audit, risk, and compliance functions to show you where the gaps are, which create that kind of comprehensive assurance model. It's probably the new risk appetite piece, and by that I mean I'm very frequently asked to do risk appetite workshops because that is right to have that as an independent conversation. We're now turning a lot of our attention towards that assurance framework and what that actually looks like for your organization as well. So really those indicators tell me that people are starting to turn the ship towards that direction a little bit more. It absolutely reduces duplication as well, but also makes sure that risks are managed coherently across all departments, rather than in that kind of siloed approach. And so, for example, we might then test how well this integrated model performs under multi-regulatory pressures, such as simultaneous audits or new compliance requirements. So, you might be busy doing your day job when actually you're then being audited. And oh, by the way, there's changes in this regulation or that compliance requirement, which actually adds significant pressure to any business. And then you can take your eye off the ball of something that comes in from the left or right. And then visualizing that governance data in real time really allows boards to make faster, more informed decisions. And this is something we're not moving into in the sector very quickly, but I'm definitely seeing it in other sectors that I work with as well. For example, higher education sectors are getting much smarter at this, about using real-time data for board meetings to really bring to life some of that data for board in the here and now. Scary, I know, but it does work. I have seen it work well. And then I guess that kind of proactive compliance piece, making sure that we're establishing task forces to, really anticipate those regulatory changes. Don't just react to them, but actually make sure we've got somebody looking up and out as to when and if these changes are coming our way. And then testing the potential impacts to that kind of internal capacity constraint. Remains, is it realistic? Is it manageable for you as an organization? What do you need to do differently? And then that third area, that data-driven risk management, is absolutely where technology and advanced analytics can transform how associations identify, assess, and mitigate risks. So that predictive analysis, that machine learning that we're all kind of dipping our toe in but slightly scared of, and associations can identify emerging risks before they materialize. Let's see. I don't know, the jury's out. So our multivariant testing example here might be to combine predictive analytics with financial stress testing and governance metrics to see how predictive models hold up under different scenarios. And when then therefore taking not just the financial aspects of risk then, but actually feeding that through to the governance side of things as well, as an example. And then, of course, that automated risk reporting. So implementing automated systems reduces that manual effort, as we know, and improves reporting accuracy. And this is particularly valuable when combined with these kind of predictive models and real-time governance dashboards. We're gradually moving forward in the sector when it comes to this. I'm seeing some organizations really looking at GRC tools now rather than just risk tools. So that governance, risk and compliance elements all joined up together. Whereas, that in the private sector is a very typical system to be using. And then that cybersecurity piece, well, cyber risk is not going away. And when we talk about all this automation, it's probably coming thick and fast. And actually, for housing associations, we need to build a robust framework to involve regular penetration testing, employee training, and incident response planning, but actually joining up those things. So we know we're doing those things in different departments, but making sure that they are fit for purpose for that cyber risk in one space is also really important to test the framework against those simultaneous threats that we might see, such as that data breach during a financial audit, which ensures preparedness across multiple dimensions as a result. So these solutions applied dynamically and in combination can create a more resilient and agile organization. I suppose what I'm saying here is that we're doing lots of this stuff, but we're doing it not together. And I think that's the real kind of important point, that we need to collaborate more closely with our colleagues to make sure that we're joining up the dots with these things and gaining the insights that they're giving us. And then in the final section, I want to talk us through, I've kind of built a little bit of a real world case study for us to have a look at in using a multivariate approach to improve our decision making, essentially, and our resilience.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
So the case study illustrates how a housing association implemented an enterprise risk management approach to addressing complex risk landscape that they were facing due to market volatility and evolving regulatory demands. So the goal of this was to integrate risk management into the strategic fabric of the organization, ensuring that risks were managed holistically, improving both resilience and decision-making at the same time. So this housing association, like many in the sector, were dealing with heightened uncertainty caused by fluctuating economic conditions and increased regulatory burden. Nothing new there. These factors made it clear, though, that traditional siloed approach to risk management was no longer effective. We were just doing it as a tick box exercise. So our objective with our leadership team was to implement a new ERM framework to align risk management to strategic objectives, which then would allow us to take a forward-looking approach, ensuring that risks were managed across the organisation rather than in isolated pockets or silos, as I'd mentioned. And so the first approach in their ERM journey was to conduct this comprehensive risk assessment. So they identified and prioritized risks across all levels of the organization, rather than focusing on that departmental risk that we so traditionally do. And they aimed to understand risks at the enterprise level, spanning across the financial, operational, and regulatory domains. And then stakeholder engagement is a really key part of this process. The organisation involved leaders from all departments, ensuring a holistic view of potential risks. By bringing together diverse perspectives, they were then able to identify interconnected risks that had potentially been overlooked in a siloed approach. And by that, I mean, have you got pockets of risk around people risk, for example, that collectively as an organisation, if you are looking at it across the organisation rather than in our departments, creates a bigger problem. And that's just one example, a nice straightforward one, but there are many that we absolutely find within this kind of approach, if you like. And so in terms of that kind of innovative strategies that we might look at here, they're aligned to the risk management process. So they've decided to include risk management within their strategic planning to ensure that risks are considered during that key decision-making process. Maintain the highest level of risk focus. They ensure that risk considerations are embedded in board-level discussions, but not just identifying where the risk features on the principal or strategic risk register, but more so a more meaningful, actually, this is how it impacts on an organisation. And then developing systems for ongoing risk monitoring and reporting were key, ensuring that risks were tracked in real time and changed in the risk landscape were promptly addressed as a result of that. And this approach allowed them to adapt strategies in response to emerging risks, ensuring that the organisation remained resilient and agile, which is what we all absolutely look to do. And this continuous feedback loop was kind of instrumental in focusing on that, fostering a proactive risk culture, if you like. So this, sorry, I'll just move on to the next slide. And so, you know, broadly speaking, what we're looking at here is making sure that we are using case studies such as this to demonstrate how housing associations can successfully move from a traditional, and I'm going to wave my arms around for those of you that know me, I'm going to wave my arms around now, and say that actually, you know, managing risk like this in the traditional risk management approach will mean that we miss things across the organisation like this if we don't manage things more holistically. So really looking at that enterprise approach to risk management is critical, rather than looking at risk in those kind of more siloed approaches that we've talked about. Integrating that ERM into the strategic processes then really enable us to improve resilience, enhance our decision making for sure, and ultimately deliver greater value to stakeholders more generally. And before I open the floor now to some questions, I'm just going to round up, if you like. And so in this section, we've kind of focused on the difference, if you like, between that kind of traditional risk management approach and the enterprise risk management approach. And I've waved my arms around a bit, talking to you about that kind of managing risk vertically versus horizontally. And actually, traditional risk management has served us well for many years, despite perhaps it giving a slightly negative name. We often operate in silos as a result of that approach, managing risks kind of separately within individual departments, whereas that more enterprise risk management approach, on the other hand, kind of takes a more integrated approach within our organisation more broadly. And so as a result, we avoid the more duplication of efforts where we've got multiple teams managing the same risk, but in different ways. Applying that kind of enterprise risk management approach means that we can actually have a collective response to risks. And for me, that's probably one of the most overriding benefits, having a library of risks that departments can pull down from and say, yes, we've got a people risk within this area. And yes, the language is something like the risk for people in that area, but slightly nuanced for us, is a lot easier for the organisation to get sight of than people developing risks in their organisation's departments that actually are, different and dealt with differently, and, extra resources put in, because we're doubling up on things when we know that those risks, there's consistency across the organisation. So finally, then, that ERM approach enables us to have that informed strategic decision making, as I'd mentioned. And actually, we've used some concrete examples there around people risk, and we might have chosen things like IT as well, where we've got, IT risks in the organisation that are consistent through finding skilled specialists in their area, for example, versus those in operations which may be overstretched or, under pressure due to a people risk. So really understanding the nuances of those risks is key. And managing these separately, well, we've spoken about that at great length. This allows the organisation really to develop comprehensive strategies when we change our approach that addresses the root cause of people risk across the organisation, as we've used as our example. So in summary, then, ERM isn't just about managing risk. It's actually about creating a connective risk culture, and actually managing it holistically across your organisation. So I really encourage you to start thinking about risk across rather than in silos, in those kind of vertical columns, because this is the key for the new way forward for risk management, in my view. So let's open the floor then to some Q&A.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you very much for coming on and sharing that today. I know we're swiftly running out of time, but there's so much to get through, and I'm really glad you're able to kind of highlight everything that is happening within the sector at the moment and everything that's going on. As you put there in your chat, if anybody would like to come in, please feel free to use the raise hand function. I'd love to bring you in. There have been some points made in the chat as well, which we'll kick things off with, really. So Claire Blackwood said, loving the idea of integrated assurance frameworks. Too often we separate things out, causing more work. That style of working often results in tenant feedback being a separate issue, i.e. to tick a box, rather than something that runs throughout all pieces of work. And Joe Lecky's backed that up by saying horizon scanning is business critical. And I think that's something that it's difficult when you try and do something like the sector risk report in half an hour, 40 minutes to try and kind of highlight absolutely everything. But you've already mentioned there around kind of economy, regulation and data cyber. You mentioned there about skill shortages at the end, and you've mentioned, I think you mentioned quite early on around kind of that tenant piece as well. All of this as well is almost going to be, I feel anyway, when we're looking at the risk of the sector as a whole, not doing these now is almost, it's almost like the perception of risk has changed from kind of like, that is definitely going to cause an issue to, you have to do this because otherwise you're going to be, it's going to be a different kind of issue in 12 months. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I could do a whole session on that kind of horizon scanning piece and that piece that you mentioned there as well. I think that absolutely, we absolutely need to be looking ahead and up and out of our organizations, and beyond the horizon, actually. What does it look like beyond what we can see? What can we, imagine within the world in front of us and beyond? Horizon scanning only enables us to see a certain amount in the future, and we start to look at, way beyond that again.
When we've got people like the CIH president this year doing her campaign on Choose Housing to get people into the sector, I think it's saying an awful lot actually about the massive fear we have in terms of loss of skills and things like that coming up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in Alicia and then I'll go back to the chat. But Alicia, good to have you with us. Do please come in.
This is a plea really rather than a question. I'm an independent nationally involved tenant who was a previous board member, so I do understand a bit about risk management. And I'd say we talk about tenant involvement, but it is very much, if we talk about silos, we are well and truly siloed still at the moment, which I think is a really, really sad thing, because rather than continuing to see us as part of the problem, housing associations really need to embrace us as part of the solution. I'm about to start blogging about the threat to all of us from for-profit rental sector, which I see, especially I have to say with the renters' rights rights bill, I see it's potentially one of the biggest threats to the housing association movement in the future. And I can see the big developers who aren't always going to be interested. They are for profit. They're not social housing providers. I can see them just waiting to step in and buy up properties and develop big estates of houses, which we're going to end up with a problem we've had in the past, that they're going to be not built to the standards which they would be built to if it was part of the social housing sector. And I think there's two things I'd say. Explain things better to us. A lot of us are now very educated people. Financial statements, don't just leave that as something that's on the websites for us to look through and ask the questions. Explain to us about, you know, the financial difficulties. I've repeatedly talked to my housing association, who are actually one of the good ones, that they leave so much of a gap for conspiracy theories about why, in the face of retrofitting, we're selling off properties. Most tenants don't understand why in some instances, it's cheaper to sell off properties than try to retrofit them. Explain that to people. And also, the other thing I've asked for our board members, who we have the most talented, exceptional group of board members at our housing associations that I've ever met, and I have in the past worked with them. Get them actually talking to the tenants, explaining the situation. A lot of them have a very good understanding of business, and they should be the ones that are coming out to us and explaining to us what the difficulties are, so that rather than us constantly being at war with each other, that we can actually work together, because we are the social housing movement. It's the staff, it's the board, it's the executive, and it's the tenants. And the other thing I'd say is be more open with us. We can't have everything. I would love as a tenant to have everything. I am very aware that at the moment I'm not going to get everything that I want. So ask us, while, you know, yes, and I'm a big one when it comes to decent home standard, and houses all do need to be safe, but actually be honest and say you can't have A, B, and C. Which out of A, B, and C is the priority for you? So that's my rant.
Oh, please don't apologize. You know, that's fantastic to hear, and it's one of the things which, when we first set up the roundtable a couple of years ago, well, 4 years ago, trying to get tenants to come on and realise that actually their voice was as even as everyone else's was quite difficult to do. And I think over the last 12 months in particular, we've done, you know, a lot in that. And I think Claire's just put in the chat there, do tell us where your blog is going to be published, Alicia. I think a lot of us would like to see it and to read it. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I absolutely believe that there should be some kind of, particularly when inducting new board members, that they should go out and visit tenants, the tenants they're going to be representing. But I think also, I agree with you, there are so many terms that are thrown around, like decent homes, you know, like the future home standard, like, you know, these terms that come about that actually don't mean anything unless you're given the information to clearly explain what it means. And that's where a lot of the relationships are breaking down. And I guess it comes back to Becky's point, which has been overriding throughout our presentation today, which is that communication piece, not just with internal teams, but with your teams working together, but also with your teams and your tenants, Becky. And I'm assuming this is something you're seeing coming up all the time.
Yes, totally. It completely resonates. What I'm hoping, though, as a result of all of the kind of regulatory changes that respond to this, is that it will drive change back to where things were, you know, perhaps in 2010, 2011, that kind of period of time, when we were more intentionally listening to and getting residents to influence the decisions that were made, before we drifted off away from that again and removed that from regulation, if you like.
One of the statements that stuck, I've said it on the roundtable before, but a statement that stuck with me really from last year. I was at a Centre for New Midlands event with Kai Jackson, who is a tenant board member. She's like, please stop calling me a tenant board member. I'm a board member. I just happen to be a tenant. I don't call you a finance board member. I don't call me a recruitment board member. I am a board member. And that stigma change really needs to happen. We've got a few things that have come up in the chat that I want to raise. So Marie Jenkins has said, I'm interested to learn from housing professionals on this call whether they see the responsibility of risk management where they see the responsibility of risk management in their organisation currently. Is it via working groups, etc.? Becky, what are you seeing kind of collaboratively while people are answering?
So broadly, I'm seeing still the traditional approach where you've got either somebody in the governance team or somebody in the finance team that is managing risk. However, I'll caveat that with some of the larger organizations, the humongous ones that I've mentioned previously, are starting to turn the tide. And actually, there is a much closer conversation between risk, process, control, and how all of those things interchange with each other. And so I would absolutely encourage organizations to start thinking about the processes and controls that support those risk journeys, if you like, and making sure that those dots are joined up.
Theo had said that do you know if the G15 adopts an ERM approach to risk or siloed approach more seen in non-G15 housing associations? I guess that comes down to, again, that piece between the large and the smaller, doesn't it, Becky?
Yes, it does. And I wouldn't say it was a given. So don't just assume that collectively the G15 are going to be doing things one way or another. They're still very individual. I don't see any patterns or trends when it comes to this. I smiled when I spotted that question, so thank you for it. But yeah, I wouldn't say that they're any different to anybody else. There's no magic bullet there.
Tony's made a really interesting point, which was that so many housing associations seems to be risk averse. How do you convince them to change? And I think maybe this is just the way I've seen it from the businesses from Spring, where I'm obviously a board member, co-chair of the board, and everything going on there. Sorry, just started snowing. It caught my eye. I think sometimes you need people in the business who are risk averse because there's you can't just go gung ho into so much because there is such a finite amount of money. There are so many problems going on. But do you sometimes find, I guess, Becky, with the businesses you're working with, that people are so scared of making, particularly as it's got harder and harder over the last 2-3 years, because everything's got tighter? Do you feel people are generally more risk averse than they were, or do you feel that actually people are more willing to take a chance at the moment?
I would say the latter. So I probably, if I was to look at the one service that I supply the most of across all housing associations, it would be risk appetite setting and risk appetite workshops. Broadly speaking, because it's probably the most challenging to do, and it's useful to have an independent view. And actually what I see is that unless you are an organization that's going through significant change at the moment, then I'm seeing people going, well, do you know what? We absolutely need to take some chances here, because if we don't do that, we're never going to address that housing need that's critical.
It's interesting because Richard's just put in the chat there, actually, with more regulation, you inevitably become more risk averse, especially with more downgrading by the regulator and everything going on. But I guess on the flip side of that, there is an absolute need for it. Unfortunately, when we're seeing some councils getting C4 ratings and others, then someone needs to go in and change something quickly.
Yes, and it's interesting because I think we should define the difference between what our executives' risk appetite is versus what our leadership. And quite often I find that because I do appetites for both, I don't just do the board risk appetite when I do a workshop, because I think it's really helpful to understand what people actually doing the job feel the appetite should be as well, and have that dialogue, that conversation with board. And that helps people to understand the risks better. So at board, you could go, oh my gosh, regulation is going to make me much more risk averse. And if you look at it on the face of it, it absolutely is. But if you look at it within the context of your organization, and your organization are going, no, actually, I'm really confident in this area of regulation. These are the things that we're doing, and we're doing them well. It changes that dial.
Certainly does. I can see a number of points coming through, so I'm going to try and do like a whistle stop through some of these. But if anybody would like their point definitely raised, please raise your hand, because I'm more likely to bring you in and make sure it gets asked. Claire Patterson has said the idea of a library of risks is spot on, Becky. Data risk, her specialism, is definitely an enterprise level risk, so should be acknowledged at levels in all teams, but managed with the help of experts in the topic. And I think that really resonates with the point that you were making before. And then Claire Payne has said, as part of our risk management approach, our board, when setting their 12-month forward programme, set out key areas in which they require tenant engagement before they make a decision. And this is enhanced by regular different survey engagement information feeding into the business, as well as complaints, whilst also considering EDI indicators. And it's strange, not necessarily strange, but I was a little bit surprised that complaints didn't come up anywhere at all in the report today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I love the approach that you've just outlined. I cannot agree more that joining those dots and making sure you've got the resident voice in there throughout is key.
Alex Lyness Brown has said one of our residents in a high-rise developed a policy that has been rolled out to all of our high-rises and will be rolled out group-wide called TRIO. The responsibility is ours. So if see something, report it. I guess then that's more of a shared responsibility thing, which is really interesting. I'll come back to it in a minute because I can't quite remember my point. Richard, I've read that one. Joe has said, if you don't take risk in business, you don't innovate and grow. An interesting point when, housing associations are businesses, an interesting way up there. And that's a whole nother philosophical potentially argument in terms of the point of a housing association. And then John Townend, strategies are all well and good for board and senior management staff. Recently come across information that less than 30% of staff read and understand the importance of everyone buying into the strategy. Do you feel there is a greater risk for local authorities and ALMOs than outlined for housing associations today, as the business models are different?
Well, from my view, I would say write your strategy different, make it accessible for the right audience. Make sure that people understand what that strategy is. If they're not reading it, there's a reason for it.
We've just had to, we simply just went through our values and everything recently with Spring and St Anne's, because we kind of went, who can name the values? And they were too complicated. They were too many words. It's like, make it simpler and people will buy in more feasibly. But also, I feel then when you're managing someone against those values, it's easier to do so when they're clear. And I think this ties into the entire strategy. How clear is your strategy for the business as a whole? And going back to Alicia's point, let your residents know the strategy. Let your residents know what you're going to be doing together and how you're going to get there. And this will overcome some of those risk challenges that you're facing.
Absolutely. Yes. Test your strategy with your residents first. Yeah, absolutely.
Claire Patterson has said a true understanding of risk appetite needs a true understanding of risk first, and what we mean by risk. There's a whole nother session for you there, Becky, as well. And Lee Jenkins, when I was a head of service, I would delegate risk management compliance to frontline staff with training. They are sometimes the best people to calculate risk. We are moving into the last minute or so, Becky. What would be your point you'd like people to take away in terms of not necessarily this is where to start with risk, but more importantly, why do we need to look at risk more collaboratively as a business, and who do you maybe need in a business to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would go back to my waving the arms around every time, Matt, when it comes to this, and that is make sure that you are managing risk not like this, but like this. And the second that you start to change your viewpoint to do that will mean that you affect some change. Get people talking about it. To be fair, when I have cross conversations with risk owners in organizations, getting them to talk across department is so much richer. So take that away and implement that one change in your organization, and you will see a maturity curve increase.
Thank you. What's the best way for people to follow up with you, Becky, from here?
So you can find me on LinkedIn or on my website. There's a blog actually on my website. It's www.houseofrisk.co.uk
around
the sector risk profile if you want to read a bit more and you haven't already as well.
Fantastic. Huge thank you to you, Becky, for today. Next week, we will be having Rachel Holiday, who's from a business called Time to Change West Cumbria, doing some incredible work in the homelessness space, particularly in rural communities. So she's coming on to talk about some of the work around homelessness. So we hope you can join us for that one. But for now, Becky, a massive thank you to you for kicking off the roundtable in 2025. And if I don't see you before, look forward to seeing you in 12 months' time.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Becky, and thank you everyone who could join us today. Really appreciate it. Look forward to catching up with you all soon. Take care.
Thanks all.